The snow fell softly on Christmas Eve in the small town of Millbrook, where the streetlights cast a warm glow on the decorated storefronts and families hurried home with their last-minute packages and their arms full of hope for tomorrow morning. Sarah Mitchell had just finished her shift at the community center, where she worked with seniors, teaching them how to use computers and helping them stay connected with their families who lived far away, and she loved her job even though it didn't pay much, because she believed that everyone deserved to feel valued no matter their age. As she walked toward the bus stop with her worn coat pulled tight against the December wind, she noticed someone sitting on the bench outside the closed drugstore, and at first she thought it was just someone waiting for a ride, but as she got closer she realized the figure wasn't moving much and something about it didn't look right. The woman on the bench was elderly with silver hair that caught the streetlight, and she wore only a thin sweater over a faded dress with holes in her stockings and no proper winter coat to speak of, and her hands were trembling as she clutched a small cloth bag to her chest. Sarah's heart immediately went out to her, and she approached gently so as not to startle the woman and said hello in a soft voice and asked if she was all right, and the elderly woman looked up with watery blue eyes that held both dignity and despair. Her name was Dorothy Harrison, and she was 83 years old, and she had been sitting there for 2 hours after being separated from her grandson at the holiday market, and her phone had died and she didn't remember his new number because her memory wasn't what it used to be, and she was too proud to ask for help until now, when the cold had seeped into her bones so deeply that she couldn't pretend anymore that she was fine. Sarah didn't hesitate, and she took off her own winter coat and wrapped it around Dorothy's thin shoulders, even though that left Sarah with only her work sweater in the freezing night, and she sat down beside the elderly woman and took her cold hands and began rubbing them gently to bring back the warmth and the circulation. Dorothy protested weakly, saying that Sarah would freeze, but Sarah just smiled and said that she was young and could handle it, and that Dorothy needed the coat more, and besides, what kind of world would it be if we couldn't look after each other, especially on Christmas Eve when love and kindness should flow as freely as the snow falling around them. Sarah used her phone to call the non-emergency police line to see if anyone had reported Dorothy missing, and sure enough, her grandson Michael had been frantically searching and had filed a report just an hour ago, and the dispatcher said he would be there in 15 minutes. While they waited, Sarah didn't leave Dorothy's side, and she talked to her about her own grandmother who had passed away 3 years ago and how much she missed her wisdom and her stories about the old days, and Dorothy's eyes brightened as she began sharing her own memories of raising 4 children mostly on her own after her husband died young in a factory accident. She told Sarah about working 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and how she cleaned houses during the day and worked at a diner at night, and how she never let her children know how tired she was or how scared she felt sometimes when the bills piled up, because she wanted them to feel safe and loved. Sarah listened with tears in her eyes because she knew that kind of strength and sacrifice, and she told Dorothy that she was an inspiration and that her children must be so proud of her, and Dorothy's voice grew quiet as she explained that 3 of her 4 children had done well and moved away and gotten busy with their own lives and rarely called anymore, and only Michael, her youngest grandson, checked on her regularly. When Michael finally arrived in his old pickup truck, he was beside himself with worry and relief, and he rushed over and hugged his grandmother and thanked Sarah over and over with his voice breaking, and Sarah just smiled and said it was nothing, that anyone would have done the same. But Michael shook his head and said that wasn't true, because he had asked 4 people at the market if they had seen his grandmother, and they had all been too busy with their shopping to stop and help him look, and one person had even told him to check with security because they didn't have time. Sarah insisted Dorothy keep the coat and said she had another one at home, which wasn't true, but she couldn't bear the thought of this woman being cold, and Michael promised to return it after the holidays, but Sarah told him to consider it a Christmas gift from one friend to another. As she watched them drive away, Sarah stood at the bus stop shivering in the December cold and wondering if her bus would come soon and whether she had any hot chocolate left at her tiny apartment. The next morning was Christmas, and Sarah woke in her modest studio apartment where she lived alone with her cat Oliver, and she made herself a simple breakfast of oatmeal and tea and called her parents, who lived in Florida now, for their health, and they talked for an hour about everything and nothing. Around 10 o'clock there was a knock at her door, and when she opened it she found Michael standing there with her coat cleaned and pressed, and his eyes were red as if he had been crying, and he asked if he could come in for just a moment. Sarah invited him inside and offered him tea, and he sat at her small kitchen table and told her that when they got home last night his grandmother had cried for the first time in years, and said that Sarah had restored her faith in people and reminded her that kindness still existed in the world. Michael explained that his grandmother Dorothy wasn't just any elderly woman, but had actually been quite wealthy years ago when her husband had built a successful manufacturing business before he died, and she had raised her children with those resources but had given most of her wealth to her children when they became adults. Two of her children had squandered their inheritances and cut off contact with her when she had no more money to give, and one had invested wisely but became too busy to visit, and only Michael's father had remained close until he died 5 years ago in a car accident, and then Michael had promised his father on his deathbed that he would look after Grandma Dorothy. Dorothy had been living modestly on Social Security in a small apartment and giving away what little she had to others in need because that was her nature, and yesterday she had been at the market buying small gifts for children at a homeless shelter when she got separated from Michael. Michael told Sarah that his grandmother had woken up that morning and made a decision, and he pulled out an envelope and handed it to Sarah with shaking hands, and inside was a check for $50,000. Sarah gasped and tried to give it back, saying she couldn't possibly accept it, but Michael stopped her and said that his grandmother had one more surprise, and he asked Sarah to look out her window. When Sarah pulled back the curtain, she saw something impossible, and 19 black SUVs were parked along her street, and standing beside them were people in suits, and Michael explained that his grandmother had made some calls that morning to old friends and business associates and lawyers. Dorothy had decided to establish a foundation in Sarah's name dedicated to helping elderly people in need, and the initial funding was $5 million, and Sarah would be the director if she wanted the position, with a salary that would change her life and the freedom to help people the way she had helped Dorothy. Sarah couldn't speak and tears rolled down her cheeks as Michael continued, and he said that his grandmother believed that Sarah's kindness came from a pure heart, and that someone with that kind of heart should have the resources to make a real difference in the world. The 19 SUVs contained board members and lawyers and financial advisors and community leaders who had all agreed to help establish the foundation, and they were waiting to meet Sarah and discuss her vision for helping seniors who had been forgotten or who had fallen through the cracks. Sarah finally found her voice and asked why Dorothy would do this for a stranger, and Michael smiled and said that Dorothy told him that Sarah wasn't a stranger but a reminder of who Dorothy used to be before life got hard and before people disappointed her, and that Sarah had given her something more valuable than money. She had given her dignity and warmth and human connection on a night when she felt invisible and forgotten, and that gift was priceless, and Dorothy wanted to make sure that Sarah could keep giving that gift to others who needed it. Over the next few months, Sarah worked with the foundation board to establish programs across 3 states, and they created warm shelters for homeless elderly people and meal delivery services and a hotline for seniors who just needed someone to talk to, and technology classes and medical assistance programs. Dorothy attended every board meeting with her sharp mind fully engaged, and Sarah realized that the elderly woman hadn't been failing at all but had simply been sad and lonely, and having purpose again had brought her back to life. 3 years later, the foundation had helped over 10,000 elderly people, and Sarah had hired a staff of 50, including many people in their 50s and 60s who understood the challenges facing seniors because they were approaching that stage of life themselves. Dorothy lived to see her 91st birthday, and at the celebration she stood with Sarah by her side and told everyone that the greatest gift she had ever received was a coat on Christmas Eve, and a reminder that one person's kindness could change the world if given the chance to multiply. When Dorothy passed away peacefully in her sleep that following winter, Sarah held her hand and thanked her for seeing something in a simple act of human decency, and for teaching her that we all have the power to lift each other up regardless of our circumstances. The foundation continued to grow, and Sarah never forgot that cold Christmas Eve when she gave away her coat and received so much more in return, and she made sure that every person who came through their doors was treated with the dignity and respect that Dorothy had deserved and that all elderly people deserve. Because in the end, that's what matters most in this life, and not the money or the recognition, but the moments when we choose to see each other's humanity and respond with love, and that's something that never goes out of style, no matter how old we get or how much the world changes around us.